Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports, and he came out firing today on a couple of things. And let's start off with your column. We've discussed it. This is the week where you do it more often now than others, and the heat is on. Dave Aranda, Shehan, you're an alum. You wrote a column. You think it's time?
Yeah, I do, ultimately. I mean, here's the reality, right? I think that Dave Aranda took over at a very difficult time in the history of college football, frankly, having to deal with the pandemic, having to deal with the new changes to transfer portal, to NIL, now House case. But I do think that 4 years after winning a conference championship is probably enough. You just see this team, and it's been plagued by the same stuff over and over and over again. It's slow starts, it's poorly coached defenses, it's missing tackles, it's having bad game plans, it's not having great energy on the sidelines. They managed to fight back from a talent perspective so much in the second half of games, but why are they consistently down in the first half of games, right? So I just think that this is an organization that obviously I think has done a great job of bringing some staff that I really like, bringing a lot of players that have played at a high level, but it just comes from the top. This is a team that continues to lose the same way. And by the way, heading into 2026, the vast majority of the best players on this team are off to the NFL or graduation. So it's not necessarily going to get better in 2026. I ultimately think that now is probably the time for a clean break. And again, I mean, Baylor hasn't fired a coach for football reasons since 2007. It's a little bit of an unprecedented moment in Baylor history.
Yeah, I was here that day. I had to interview the coach the day before. It was awkward, but he was a pro about it, Guy Morris. Shehan, I'm just not totally convinced that Mac will do it. I think that he really likes Dave. I think he has it in the back of his mind that this is going to be his Bill Belichick and the Browns, where it was what it was. It's over. And then Dave goes somewhere and the light comes on and he wins a title somewhere else.
I mean, and look, that's totally possible, right? There's no question about it. Dave Aranda knows how to coach ball and knows how to coach defense, even if it isn't necessarily happening at this place right now. But does Bill Belichick become Bill Belichick if he stays with the Cleveland Browns? Is there a magic switch that would have been flipped? Not necessarily. It wouldn't have necessarily helped the Cleveland Browns if he stays there 5 more years. He did have to move on. Now, obviously, the Browns never recovered from that, but I don't necessarily know that would have changed anything to make a different decision. And I'll tell you what, right now, I think that Baylor football in this environment is a better job right now than what the Cleveland Browns is in the NFL, relatively speaking. So I totally do understand that perspective. Something that I've heard behind the scenes is like, especially when they decided to bring him back in 2023, which is a decision that I understood and I thought was probably the right one. The thing that you always heard is like, this is a guy who fits this place so well, who we feel like can maybe be our next Grant Taft, who can be somebody who is kind of the identity of the program is built in his image. He obviously has so many things about the way that he expresses his faith, his personality, his demeanor are all things that I think that Baylor really wanted to embrace. But the reality is this: if Baylor finishes this season below 500, like we all kind of expect at this point, that'll be 3 of the last 4 years finishing with a losing record. The only exception would be last year's 6-game winning streak, when they also started 2-4, by the way. So it just has been so inconsistent. And while I don't necessarily think that you fire him if he's, just for not winning championships, I do think that you are at a point where when you're looking at the inputs that are being put into this Baylor football program, they're better in 6 and 7. They're better than 4 and 4. They're better than 2 and 4 last year. And I think that at a certain point, again, maybe something else happens with Dave Aranda. Maybe he goes on to greatness somewhere else. I just don't think it's going to be at Baylor.
Shehan, a lot of good games last week. A little bit of a quieter schedule, but that means it probably will be chaotic as all hell because that's kind of how college football operates. But what were you, I guess, thinking about most top of mind coming out of last Saturday night? Was it the Brian Kelly firing? Was it A&M's big win to get Brian Kelly finally fired, or was it something else that happened last week? And kind of where was your head when it was all starting to settle down?
Yeah, I think for me, it was really on Texas A&M. I mean, for them to go on the road, I know obviously LSU has kind of been collapsing, but for them to go in and be up 49 to, or sorry, yeah, it was 49-18, I believe it was, before that last touchdown. Like, that is a beatdown. I don't care what LSU team you're playing against. To go into Death Valley at night and absolutely lay the wood the way that they did, That's not something you see very often, right? It's been a very long time since LSU has lost a game like that. And I think that, yes, obviously LSU has something to do with that, but Texas A&M had something big to do with that as well. That Saturday was the first time that I felt like Texas A&M might be a national championship caliber team. I think that you look at them right now, they're passing the ball at an incredibly high level with Marcel Reed throwing to Casey Concepcion and Mario Craver. They're running the ball at a high level. They just keep finding new running backs to throw out there, and it's working. Defensively, Cassius Howell has been one of the biggest additions of the season. He has 10 sacks now through the first 8 games of the year. And in the secondary, I think they're playing at a high level. And by the way, I didn't even mention on special teams where they created a touchdown as well, a 79-yard return from Casey Concepcion. They can beat you in any way. They are so talented. They are so well coached. They are so physical and tough. This is so different, in my opinion, from some of those A&M teams that you've seen over the past couple of years. It's a team that I think is really capable of going all the way.
By the past couple of years, he means always. But
hey, I wasn't there in the 30s. I can't speak to it.
Yeah, no. Okay. You remember when you're a kid and like the dad in the neighborhood would play all-time quarterback when you're like in the yard? I'm going to make you all-time AD, and we're going to rapid fire through open coaching jobs. So
let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. We'll start with LSU. You just go rapid fire who you're going to hire. LSU.
Really, really tough one. I think I'm going to say Lane Kiffin, but they really could do almost anything.
Penn State.
Yeah, another tough one. I'm going to go with Matt Rule, but I would not be surprised if they go a different direction.
Florida.
These are all tough, obviously.
Yeah.
If it were me, I'm going with John Summerall. I do have some reservations about whether they're going to go with another group of 5 coach, though.
Arkansas.
Yeah, man, this is a really tough game. I'll tell you what. I think that I go with Alex Golesh. His family has some ties to the Midwest. You kind of get a little bit of that overlap. So I'll go with Golesh for right now.
Okay, and last one, Oklahoma State.
That one's the easy one to me. I think Eric Morris should be their first primary target. I think he keeps a lot of that DNA, but also brings something different.
Do you have a preference if that Baylor job were to open up, Shehan?
Yeah, very early, obviously, and we know that if, assuming Mack Rhoades is doing the hire, he likes to spread his net wide. Nobody thought Dave Aranda, nobody thought Matt Rule, which is something that I really admire about Mack Rhoades, by the way. I think the 2 obvious candidates to me that I'd want kind of top of mind are Eric Morris up the road. I think that it would be really interesting to see him make a decision between Oklahoma State and Baylor. I think there's a lot of attractiveness of that Baylor job. The other one, though, it goes a little bit off board. Will Stein, the offensive coordinator at Oregon, is a really interesting name to me for a couple of reasons. One, I think that obviously he's a great offensive mind, and I think that Baylor fans would love to see, I think, an offensive coach after what these past couple of years have been with a defensive coach. Second, he is somebody who I think can win in a lot of different ways with his offense. Third, you're really importing that Oregon system down here is what you want more than anything else when it comes to player development, talent acquisition. Now, obviously, you're not playing with Uncle Phil's pocketbook, but I think that he still has, I think, a really smart way to approach roster building. And the other thing, too, he was the offensive coordinator at Lake Travis High School. He was Jeff Traylor's offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach at different times at UTSA. He knows this region. He knows this part of the country. Oregon has actually done a great job of recruiting Texas as well. I think he checks a lot of boxes if you want to go the coordinator routes.
I also saw your comments on Brian Kelly, which, of course, has been a dominant theme and a story throughout the last 72 hours. And the stories that are coming out, a lot of times it's easy to pick on somebody, throw them under the bus after they're gone. But we had kind of had an idea about this at LSU. What are your thoughts about him? And do you think he'll coach again?
It's an interesting question, right? Because I think that it's never been a secret that Brian Kelly can be a little bit of a tough guy to deal with. I think that was true even at Notre Dame. There's the famous story of, I think it was Matt LaFleur and Robert Saleh, who kind of thought that they were going and invited to a party when they were at Central Michigan. They were actually recruited to move cars outside of the party at Brian Kelly's house. Like there have been examples of this over the years of Brian Kelly maybe not connecting well. But, I will say, I do feel like some of these stories that have come out of LSU feel a little bit worse. Obviously you have the situation with Kyron Lacey's family, who said that they never heard from Brian Kelly after Kyron Lacey tragically committed suicide. You have the situation with the player who had cancer in his brain and lost the ability to walk for a while. He said that his dad said that Brian Kelly was just not in touch with him very much at all. There was a story that came out of a former LSU player who was kind of pushed into medical retirement, and Brian Kelly didn't handle that situation very well in his mind. And again, there are just so many stories of people being like, he never talked to me, he never got to know me. Like, LSU is truly one of those programs where people pick the program, not the coach. Again, Brian Kelly doesn't have nothing to do with the recruits coming to campus, but LSU is a force unto itself. And you see the amount of people who say, man, I love LSU, I wanted to come to LSU, but I just never even got to know the head coach. Like, that's just something that's not acceptable in college football. And to me, I think one thing that surprised me is Brian Kelly is one of those coaches who really went up the ranks. He started in Division II at Grand Valley State. He went to FCS, to FBS, Cincinnati, to Notre Dame, to now at LSU. Like, you think that somewhere along the road, you realize kind of the value of having these relationships. And I think that that's going to make it very interesting to see whether he's hired somewhere else, because I don't think that any major program, at least, will want to deal with some of this outside stuff.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of the ones that are, it's a little more innocuous than not talking to a kid's family who died or had cancer or any of that. It's just like a lot of starters are like, I was a 2-year starter, and it was more of just a, hey, how you doing relationship, and there was no connection. Like, every interaction he had was with the position coach or the coordinator, but not really Brian Kelly. And I think that, and I've thought this the last couple of years, I think the deity coaches, or the guys that want to be the deity coach, the Urban Meyer kind of people, are just going to have a hard time now, because there's a lot more exposure than there was before.
No question. And I think the other thing too is like the reality of being in the SEC and at LSU especially. Like, you are a politician. That is your job when you take a job like this. We talked about this a few weeks ago with James Franklin. I think that being in central Pennsylvania gives a little bit of a unique perspective, even compared to other Big Ten jobs. But you need to understand, it's not explicitly your job to be out in the community and making friends. But this is what happens when you don't have friends to fall back on. The governor gets involved, administration, the Board of Regents gets involved. People have negative feedback for you behind the scenes as well. They're leaking stuff to reporters. Like, this is what happens when you don't build those bridges with a place. And I think, we had this big conversation the other day on the College Football Insiders podcast. And one thing that we said is, like, here's the reality, right? The problem isn't that Brian Kelly wasn't from Louisiana or wasn't from the Southeast. That's not what not fitting meant. It's that he's a prickly guy who doesn't necessarily care about making friends. And we talk about sort of the good old boy nature of the SEC a lot, but like, this is where it helps you. I think about a coach like Will Muschamp over at Florida and South Carolina. He got probably additional years that he wouldn't have gotten because people liked him, people supported him, and people wanted him around. If you burn those bridges, the first sign of trouble, they're going to throw you out the door.
Shehan, as far as the games this weekend, I'm just going to pick one just based on time and everything. Texas and Vanderbilt. Can Vandy possibly now go on the road and make it 3 straight top 25 wins, or is Texas just going to keep on just finding ways to win, even though it's not always that impressive like last week in Starkville? What are your thoughts on this game?
This is an interesting one because I do think that Texas's defense matches up decently well with this Vanderbilt offense. And from a physicality perspective, they're going to be one of the biggest challenges that Vanderbilt has had since that Alabama game that they lost. Now, I also think that defensively, Vanderbilt's going to do a good job of keeping Texas's offense under control. We don't know at this point whether Arch Manning is going to be the starter or Matthew Caldwell, but the reality is, no matter who the starter is, they've struggled to run the ball. And if Vanderbilt can make them one-dimensional, that's going to give them a chance to win. So I do have Vanderbilt winning a close game, but it's going to be a very low-scoring one. You're probably going to need to see some playmaking from Diego Pavia to get it over the finish line.
How about that? Vanderbilt right in the middle of it, Virginia right in the middle of it, Georgia Tech right in the middle of it, Texas Tech and BYU, and who knows, Cincinnati. Man, it's a lot of fun to see some of the fresh names inside of what is the race for the college football playoff. Thanks for your time, Shehan. Great story. And what you wrote, we had Sean Fulton responded to your column because I retweeted it and said you're going to be on, and he was asking me about questions about what is Aranda's strength. You answered a lot of the questions without me even bringing up his question. So thank you very much for your time. Have a great week.
Thank you so much for having me.